Hello everyone, welcome back to Dark Whisper. If this is your first time here, let me introduce you to a channel that specializes in collecting mysterious and thrilling horror stories from various social media platforms. You can listen to them before bed or whenever you need some background sound to help you focus on something. Wishing you an immersive storytelling experience. Now, let's get started.
I'd been working maintenance for a few years by the time I got done with college, mostly just garbage pickup and stuff like that at apartment complexes my dad was in charge of in central Arizona. The pay was okay, and I got my own little place where I was living with my girlfriend. It was all pretty good in its own right, but I wasn't making terribly much, and we'd never been able to take a vacation or anything on our own. It was on a Wednesday when I saw an ad in my city newspaper for a pool boy in a little place a few miles out of town for almost twice what I was making doing all the other maintenance work. I almost immediately called the number the paper mentioned and was greeted by a calm-sounding man, probably in his mid-40s. When I inquired about the job, he seemed to become even happier, and we set up a meeting time. That Saturday we met at his place, a big, open house with lots of windows and all the latest appliances. He seemed to be a pretty nice guy, rich too, obviously. When I asked why he was offering so much just to monitor his pool, he replied that he had just let his last guy go and that his pool always needed surveillance because he had a young daughter and she had a lot of friends, that sort of thing. I accepted the job almost instantly and was gladly up at his place right after my 2-week notice passed at my dad. Work was pretty smooth for the first few weeks, my new employer being much more understanding of circumstances than my old man was allowed to be due to rules and regulations every employee had to follow at his complex. I could go in and cool off when it seemed too hot outside. He always kept his fridge stocked with water. It all seemed exceedingly comfortable. I would occasionally make small talk with the maid. She couldn't speak English very well, but one day when I asked her, she told me the boss was a cosmetic surgeon, obviously a very wealthy one at that. As a personal rule, I'm generally against that kind of stuff and admittedly grimaced at the prospect of working for someone whose money came from boob job. Still, he seemed like a nice, settled-in family man, and the pay was good, so I let it be. About 2 months in, I was clearing some sand and other sorts of residue out of the bottom of the pool, faintly hearing the sound of a piano inside. The doc's window was wide open, and he was overseeing his daughter practicing. I try not to snoop, but work was taking longer than expected, and the music was pleasant until it suddenly stopped. I could hear the doc calmly explaining to the daughter what she did wrong, but in an instant she was screaming at him that she wanted to stop. It hadn't occurred to me until then that she had been playing the entire morning. With this in mind, I couldn't help but listen in just a little over the sound of my pool vacuum. He started shouting and threatening to ground her, to take her dolls away. I caught something that I didn't quite understand, something about her big Barbie. When I began to hear the music again, I went back to cleaning out the pool, trying to forget what I had just heard. Though I tried to make good on this attempt, I decided I'd be on the watch for this kind of thing in the future. I know parents snap at their children and all, but if this turned into abuse, someone was going to hear about it. Sometime thereafter, I was inside getting a drink when I got a good look at a photo on the refrigerator I had never noticed before. It showed the doctor, his daughter, and 2 other women, one in her 40s or 50s and the other a teenager. Judging by the doc's youngest daughter, it looked fairly recent. I asked the maid about it, and in the best broken English she could give me, she said the older woman was the doctor's wife, and the younger his older daughter. I hated to keep asking questions, given her difficulty speaking to me, but I pressed on just a little more to ask why I never saw them around. Now with difficulty not only speaking but recalling, she told me the doctor's daughter was killed in a car crash a year ago and his wife killed herself shortly thereafter. This shocked and horrified me, and suddenly, I couldn't help but feel a new sense of compassion for the doctor and his daughter. As soon as I was hydrated, I went right back to work, wondering if I'd ever seen much sign of grief from the two. Maybe that was why the doctor was so uptight about some things with his daughter. Maybe that was why she clung to her toys the way she did. It was a lot to take in. Time went on and my work continued. I had never imagined doing what I did as a year-round job. I used to live in the Midwest. Pools usually closed around Labor Day, but down here they were open all the time, and the doc's kid and her friends just kept coming over. One day, doing my usual work, I noticed a large splotch at the bottom of the pool for what must have been the third time. I was irritated and reluctantly accepted normal chlorine wasn't going to do the trick. I had to shock the thing. I checked the doc's notes and they did indeed confirm that he had some of the stuff I needed. It was kept in the basement. Seemed like an odd place for it, but I digress. Maybe it was to keep it out of his daughter's hands. Speaking of the doc's daughter, my eye caught her and a couple of her friends about to jump in the water. I had to shout at them to stop and she threw a fit at me for doing so. I just figured the splotch in the pool would be a bacterial breeding ground, and was not letting little kids in it. I found my maid friend again and, now frantic to make the pool clean for the boss's daughter, asked her where the basement was. She responded with a confused look. I tried several other phrases, my high school Spanish long lost, until she recognized the word cellar. She led me outside after I mentioned it and pointed me to a dingy little trapdoor in the ground connected to the house right next to the hose. I had never noticed it there before, and it was tightly bound with what appeared to be shiny new chains with very little dirt on them. I tried to ask her how I was supposed to open it, but we both lacked the vocabulary to communicate properly. I was about to bitterly accept defeat, leave the doc a note and tell him to not worry about paying me that day until his daughter walked up to me. She said she had a key to the cellar. I was confused by this right from the get-go, and even more so when she mentioned I couldn't tell her dad that she did. But I wanted to get back to work, so I agreed to her conditions. I was in the dimly lit cellar a few minutes later as she shouted at me to not play with any of her toys. Why did she have toys down here? Was this where the doc kept her stuff when she was in trouble? Was that why she wasn't supposed to have a key? I fumbled around in the dark for a while, the light from outside only helping me so much, desperately looking for a light switch. As I continued to wander around, I ultimately felt myself pushing up against something. It felt like a wall, but there was no weight behind it. Not entirely sure what I was doing, I pushed against it and suddenly toppled into another passage. Confused, disoriented, and growing increasingly frightened, I felt around for a switch again and quickly found one on the wall. Despite the short time I had spent in the cellar, I was briefly blinded when I switched the thing on. But more so when I got a good look at the room. That was not just some dingy cellar I had walked into. The thing extended beneath the house and was filled, to my shock and slight disturbance, with oversized pink and white furniture. My jaw was agape as I searched around, finding a fully functioning bathroom, den, everything. The rooms were much smaller than they had been upstairs, but they were still comparable to a decent hotel's. Why on earth did the doctor have all this down here? I wandered through just a little more, too shocked by what I had seen to turn back, when I came upon a bedroom. Of course, everything was still pink and huge, and this room even included a closet full of clothes. But the most notable feature present was what appeared to be a giant cardboard box sitting in the room's center. In sloppy handwriting, the box read, "My favorite Barbie." I didn't want to open the box. I swore at myself for dropping down and grabbing the bottom of the cardboard cube, my consciousness screaming to put the damn thing down and find whatever I had come for. I couldn't even remember anymore. But I just had to know what all this was for. I wish I'd never taken that job. I wish I'd never gone into that cellar. I wish I'd never opened that fucking box. I screamed and scrambled away the instant I saw what I did. Standing before me, at almost my exact height, was a Barbie doll. I struggled to catch my breath as I stared at the thing. I was full of doubt Mattel had made anything like this, but the likeness was nearly perfect to the dolls I'd been seeing around the house. Her eyes were wide open and green, and she had long blonde hair and bright pink lips smiling. Still trying to take it in, I noticed the doll was naked. It had oversized breasts without any nipples, and that seemingly impossible figure that led down to a solid patch of skin where the genitals would be. Heart pounding, I noticed something along the doll's back. I slowly went behind it to take a look, seeing a large, bulbous thing sticking out of it, almost like a button. Letting curiosity defeat me once again, I gently pressed it. "Help me!" The doll screamed in a shrill voice. I ran from it towards the door, not even so much shocked by the scream as what I had felt. I had touched flesh. No, I thought, that was impossible. This thing appeared to gleam like plastic a moment ago. That wasn't real. But as I continued to back away, my fears were confirmed. I could see the doll's chest expanding and contracting. The doll was breathing. The doll was real. My jaw was dropped, tears starting to well up in my eyes. This was not happening. What the fuck was I even looking at? Struggling to accept all that was before me, I darted around the moment I could hear footsteps over my pounding heart. There was the doctor, just a few feet behind me, holding a syringe. "Well then," he muttered, "I guess you found our playroom." I gently slid a hand into my pocket as I demanded that he tell me what was going on. Ensuring he couldn't see, I managed to worm my cell phone out of my pocket. Without a hint of sadness or remorse in his voice, the doctor told his tale, chilling me to the bone as I managed to trigger the video camera on my phone. He told me that he desired the same thing any other parent does, to have the perfect child. He told me how though it all seemed to be going well with his older daughter, she started to rebel in her teenage years. Her grades started to slip in high school, and he caught her having sex on the living room couch. He was so overwhelmed by her misbehavior, he was ready to give up on her entirely. He told me he was convinced if he pampered his younger daughter, surely she would behave right. Christmas before last, he asked her what she wanted. She said she wanted a big Barbie doll that could do anything she told it to and that would play with her all the time. The doctor told me how he spent a month and a half planning what he'd do, planning how to pamper his younger and punish his older. My wife found out at one point. All for the best, though. I was planning on just bringing some fat and collagen home from work, but I think she worked out much more smoothly. He told how he staged the disappearance of his daughter while he sedated and put her under the knife. He spent over a week getting everything just right before he surprised his younger daughter with the playmate she always wanted. In exchange for just being my perfect little angel. My jaw was slack, too horrified of it all to move. Why was he going on and on? Was he bragging about this disgusting accomplishment? He talked and talked, about how she'd been living off juices and purees he made, how her eyes were glass and hand-painted, how he'd tried to just leave in the originals but she cried too much and her younger pointed out her toy didn't blink, and how she had little chips throughout her body that would give her a brutal shock if she used her vocal cords and you didn't press the button first. "You're going to fry, you sick son of a bitch!" I shouted. "You. What the fuck is wrong with you?" "Well, of course, I wouldn't tell you all this if I was going to let you leave," he said with a smile. "I've needed a matching Ken doll, you know." I tried to swallow, but my mouth was too dry. "Now, come here and take your medicine." He was unexpectedly strong and managed to tackle me quickly, knocking the phone out of my hand. The needle came deathly close, but despite the momentary advantage, I had the weight edge to force him off of me and grab my phone. As much as I wanted to help the poor, mutilated girl, I had to save myself first, running as fast as I could out of the basement and to my car. As fast as I've ever driven in my life. I pulled out of the doctor's driveway and slammed the gas the moment I shifted into drive. About a minute later, I could hear the sound of a shotgun firing in the distance. I managed to make it back into town, cars everywhere, long before I saw anything of the doctor in my rear view. I pulled into the police station and flipped open my phone, searching for the evidence to incarcerate the insane bastard, only to find my SD card had been destroyed when he tackled me. I had nothing to give the police but my testimony, and even in my head, I knew it was too mad to be true. I drove to my parents' place that night, the house empty. I assumed they were gone on a date or something, searched around in my dad's room, and found his revolver. I don't remember much more of the night, but my girlfriend tells me I was extremely on edge, constantly looking out the window. 3 days after my horrifying discovery, I drove back to the house, armed, ready to pay the doctor back for his crime against humanity. When I arrived, however, the house was entirely abandoned, no sign of anyone anywhere. When I checked the horrors of the cellar, the doll and its box were gone. I found one of the doctor's business cards while snooping and made a call to his office that night. The receptionist said he had left on very short notice with no real explanation. That was about a year ago. I've spent I don't know how many nights sleepless with what I experienced in that basement. I am only mentioning this now because on Yahoo.com's newsfeed, I found an article about a pool boy in southern Florida mysteriously disappearing. In the video attached, there were tearful testimonies from his family and his employer, speaking all the while with his daughter within audible range, bragging to her friends that she was getting a Ken doll for her favorite Barbie. My roommate is into some weird fairy shit, and these aren't cute little human dragonflies with flower petals for clothes and sweet smiles. I don't know about you guys, but when I think of fairies, I'm picturing something like Tinkerbell. That is not the shit my roommate is fucking with. I noticed she was weird when I moved in. She was advertising for a roommate on Craigslist, and she said she'd need someone who was open-minded, who was alright with strange people coming and going at all hours, who wouldn't ask questions about things that didn't involve them, and who would be okay with sharing a bathroom. Yeah, okay, not ideal. But I didn't need ideal, I needed livable. And honestly, I didn't really give a shit what she did in her spare time. Hell, she could have been cooking meth in her room. As long as she didn't get me involved in her drug deals, I wouldn't have given a shit. Turns out she wasn't dealing drugs. Unless she was sharing marijuana with her deadbeat friends or something. Instead, she was into the occult, supernatural stuff, conspiracy theories. She believes in anything and everything. She's convinced she's seen Bigfoot. She was abducted by aliens when she was 10 years old. She doesn't get vaccines because the government is using them to control people's minds. That kind of stuff. Is it terrible for me to say that I kind of like her? I mean, let's make no mistake here, she's fucked in the head. But she's actually a really good roommate. Pays her bills on time, cleans up after herself, asks me before having her weird gatherings and rituals and shit. Whenever she buys groceries, she grabs my favorite candy bar for me. And at least she's interesting. I'd rather sit and talk to her for an hour than listen to Nancy from work describe her latest MLM adventures. And before you argue with me, Stella, that's the name my roommate chose for herself, I guess. Doesn't vote, so it's not like her weird-ass opinions and beliefs hurt anyone else. She told me once she thinks that if you enter a voting booth, the government will put you to sleep, embed your skin with a mind-reading chip, and release you back into society, and you won't have any memory of what happened. And that it happened to her mom, and that's why her mom believes in evolution. Right. Anyway, so life with Stella wasn't terrible. We got along okay for the most part, and we managed to live together for 6 months before her weirdness started getting a little too close for comfort. What do I mean by that? Well, one morning I woke up to mold growing in a ring in our living room. Seriously, it was a huge ass ring. Our living room is actually pretty sizable, especially since Stella doesn't believe in furniture, so it's practically empty except for her weird candles everywhere. It never bothered me, since I don't use the common spaces much anyway. But mold growing in my apartment was definitely not okay. Stella, what the hell is this? I asked. Stella was sitting at the edge of it, a mountain of books next to her. I saw a few titles straight away. Myths of the Fae Folk, Fairies and Other Creatures, The Magical Arts. In her hands was a book on botany, which was extremely peculiar in the moment, but not so much in hindsight. It's a fairy ring. At least it will be, she said, a small frown on her petite lips as she pored over her book. I bit back the urge to scream. I don't know what a fairy ring is, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't belong in our fucking living room. If you don't get it out of here, so help me God. Stella sighed and put her book down. I thought you'd say that, she said, reaching into the black messenger backpack at her side and pulling out a slightly crumpled envelope. She always had that bag on her, and I often saw her pull out any number of weird things from it. So you can understand that I was a little hesitant to take the envelope from her. But I did, and I opened it, and immediately my frayed nerves were soothed. $500 in cash will do that to a person. For the inconvenience, she said, going back to her book without a second glance at me. And if we get in trouble with the landlord, I'll pay for any damages. I knew our landlord wouldn't bother coming around and checking. He didn't give a shit what anyone did in those apartments anyway, so I was more than happy to let it slide. As long as that shit didn't start growing in my room. I did wonder where she got all that money though. Stella was never short on cash, even though she didn't have a job, at least not that I could tell. Oh well, never look a gift horse in the mouth. I shrugged my shoulders and let it go. That night before I went to bed, I googled fairy rings. I only read for about 5 minutes before I got bored and gave up on it. Do you know how much has been written about these things? Too fucking much. Anyway, I figured out 2 very important things. First, many cultures believe that fairy rings are caused by fairies or pixies dancing in a circle. Second, mortals absolutely should not fuck with them. Now, I wasn't worried. Not only did I not believe in fairies, but I was also pretty sure you couldn't just grow your own fairy ring. I figured that Stella would lose interest in it after a few weeks, like she always did with her random obsessions, and then she'd get rid of it and life would continue as normal. Before that had a chance to happen, however, the fairy ring grew. After a few days, it had sprouted mushrooms. I shit you not, literal mushrooms were growing in my living room. Stella seemed overjoyed with this arrangement. I was pretty grossed out because our room was starting to smell damp and musty and just gross. I really wanted to yank up that carpet and scrub all that nasty crap away, but I focused on the $500 I was getting for being cooperative and tried to will away my annoyance. Stella's excitement grew over the next few days until it spilled over into the few conversations we had. It's almost ready. They'll be here soon, I can feel it, she said one night when we were having a beer. She was sitting in the middle of the circle while I stayed far outside it. Not out of superstition, but because I wasn't going near that nasty thing. Are you sure that's how it works? I asked. My skepticism must have been obvious, because her response was just on this side of indignant. I've done my research, Janice. It's like that movie, what was it? If you build it, they will come. Just like that. I've made the ring, they won't be able to resist dancing on it. That's just how it works. I wasn't convinced, but hell, why not? It's not real anyway, so who cares how she thinks it works? So, what happens afterwards? She looked confused. After what? After the fairies show up, I said. What happens? Do you talk to them? Trap them? Ask them to grant you a wish? What? She stared at me in utter bewilderment for a second, and then burst out laughing. God, Janice, you're so funny sometimes, she said. I chose not to press the point. Instead, I finished my beer and went to bed. Things played out about how I expected over the next week or so. Stella was obsessed with her fairy ring. I cycled between ignoring it and indulging her. Eventually, her interest started to wane and she began to turn her attention to other things. I noticed a few books on the Jersey Devil appearing around the apartment, so I figured that's what would plague my life next. I felt like I was living in some sort of sitcom. And then, 3 weeks ago, something different happened. I woke up around 4 in the morning, my sleep disturbed by a strange blue glow coming from under my door. I stumbled out of bed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes as I went in search of the light source. As soon as I entered the living room, I was almost blinded by the blue light assaulting my eyes. I swore to myself as I shielded my face, trying to let my eyes adjust. Eventually, They did, and I was able to take in the terrible sight that awaited me. Stella, naked, dancing on the fairy ring. Her body twisted and jerked, almost like she was being pulled along. She stumbled but didn't fall, going round and round so quickly it made me dizzy. I started to walk towards her, confused and somewhat unsettled. Was she on acid or something? I almost just went back to my room and pretended I hadn't seen anything. But then the blood caught my attention. It oozed from small cuts all over her body. A ring of blood was crusted around her wrist. Slashes across her abdomen resulted in red rivulets tracing paths down her legs. Finally, I saw her face. Her eyes were fixed on me, and a shudder worked its way down my spine. Her face was twisted in agony, her mouth a grimace, her eyes red with tears. Snot was running out of her nose. She was heaving for breath, and I was sure, so sure I saw her scream. Except, there was no sound. Nothing at all. I couldn't hear the sound of cars passing by on the road outside, the sound of her feet on the carpet, the sound of her breathing. It was like I was trapped in a vacuum. But, then again, I didn't really need to hear what she was screaming. I could read it on her lips like the words had been printed there. Help me, help me, help me, help me. My body responded to her silent plea, and I lunged at her, hand outstretched, intent on wrenching her from the circle. But just then, she disappeared, vanished in front of my eyes as though she'd never been there. I tripped and fell to my knees, just outside the ring of glowing blue mushrooms that dotted the floor. Slowly, before my eyes, the glow faded to nothing until I was alone in the dark. Just me, the silence, and the knowledge that Stella was not coming back. I called the police, of course. That's what you do, right? I've never been in a situation quite like that before. I knew I couldn't tell them what I saw. So I just told them that when I woke up, she was gone, and that was rare for her. That I was worried something had happened. They declared her missing. I steered clear of the living room. I wanted to get out of there as fast as humanly possible, so I booked a hotel room until I managed to find another place. I didn't give a shit about breaking the lease or forfeiting the security deposit on the apartment. I just wanted out. I got a place pretty quickly, a real dump of a studio apartment, but it's affordable, and built up my courage to go back to our apartment, to pack up my few things and go. When I opened the door, God, no matter how long I live, I'll never forget this. When I opened the door, she was there. Lying there, in the middle of the fairy ring. The cuts had deepened into permanent grooves in her body. She was thinner than before, as though someone had sucked the flesh out of her, tightened her skin until it was tough and leathery. In fact, she almost looked like she'd been mummified. Her eyes were gone. Her teeth were gone. Her mouth was still gaping open, still screaming for someone to help her. And as I stared at the body, I swear to God I heard a faint giggle coming from somewhere in the apartment. I think I'm done with roommates for a while. I think I'm done with roommates for a while. I think I'm done with roommates for a while. I think I'm done with roommates